At 3:47 a.m. in her $12 million penthouse, tech billionaire Aurelia Voss stood over her son's crib, watching him struggle in his sleep. The same legs that specialists said might never walk were twitching, fighting, even in dreams. She'd spent $500,000 on cutting-edge therapy equipment, hired the world's top pediatric specialists, and still, 18-month-old Theo couldn't take a single step. The city sparkled below through floor-to-ceiling windows, a constellation of possibilities that felt impossibly distant from this nursery, where hope seemed to wither each night. Theo's small fists clenched against his blanket, his body wrestling with challenges that no amount of money could simply erase. Every shallow breath he took reminded Aurelia of the fragility that existed beneath her empire of success. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, leaving a ghostly imprint that would disappear by morning, much like the optimism she'd carried into each failed therapy session. 6 months of intensive treatment, 43 appointments with renowned specialists, 0 independent steps. The irony wasn't lost on her. Forbes had just named her one of the most powerful women in tech, yet she couldn't empower her own child to walk across a room. Her smartphone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand. Board meetings, acquisition deals, product launches, a relentless stream of conquerable challenges. But here, in the soft glow of Theo's nightlight, she faced her most important battle with nothing but exhausted prayers and crumbling faith. Have you ever felt that all your resources meant nothing when it mattered most? Let me know in the comments. By 6:30 a.m., Aurelia's transformation began. Designer suit replacing pajamas, confidence mask carefully applied with morning skincare. The vulnerable mother dissolved into the commanding CEO who could negotiate billion-dollar deals before breakfast. Yet even as she dictated emails to her assistant, her eyes drifted to the baby monitor, displaying Theo's peaceful sleeping face. Mrs. Voss, the physical therapy team will arrive at 2, her housekeeper Margaret announced, arranging Theo's morning medications with practiced precision. Each pill represented another attempt, another hope that today might bring the breakthrough they'd been chasing. Cancel them, Aurelia said quietly, surprising herself with the decision. I need to try something different. Margaret's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she nodded. After 15 years of service, she'd learned to recognize the moments when Aurelia needed space to think. The nursery had become a medical facility disguised as a child's room. Parallel bars dominated one corner. 8,000 of titanium and hope. A gate trainer occupied another space, its harness system designed to support Theo's weight while encouraging movement. Exercise mats, sensory toys, adaptive equipment worth more than most families' annual income filled every available surface. But when Theo woke, struggling to pull himself upright against his crib rails, none of it mattered. His determined grunts echoed the same frustration Aurelia felt, the gap between wanting something desperately and being unable to achieve it. His cerebral palsy affected the messages between his brain and muscles, creating invisible barriers that expensive equipment couldn't bridge. "Good morning, my brave boy," Aurelia whispered, lifting him gently. His weight felt both precious and heartbreaking, a reminder of how much she wanted to protect him from a world that might not understand his challenges. Dr. Peterson's words from last week still stung. "We need to manage expectations, Mrs. Voss. Theo may never achieve independent mobility." The clinical detachment in his voice had made her want to scream. Manage expectations? She'd built a tech empire by refusing to accept limitations. But watching Theo struggle with basic movements that other children mastered effortlessly, she wondered if determination alone could overcome biology. Across the city, in a modest apartment where morning sunlight filtered through budget curtains, Malik Reyes was conducting his own daily ritual of quiet hope. His daughter Zuri, 8 years old with coffee-colored curls and eyes full of mischief, was adjusting her prosthetic leg with the matter-of-fact competence of a child who'd adapted to extraordinary circumstances. "Dad, can we stop by the community center today?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of brightness that made Malik's chest tighten with pride. 6 months ago, after the car accident that changed everything, he'd wondered if he'd ever hear that eager tone again. "After my job interview," he promised, though the word interview felt optimistic. With the construction industry struggling, Opportunities for someone with his limited education were becoming scarce. The savings account that had once felt adequate now seemed dangerously thin. Malik's hands, scarred from years of manual labor but gentle from necessity, helped Zuri with her morning routine. Each task required patience and creativity, qualities he'd developed not through training, but through love and desperation. When your child depends entirely on you, you learn to become whatever they need. The community center had become their sanctuary. Unlike the sterile medical facilities, where insurance limitations determined treatment options, this place welcomed families regardless of their financial circumstances. Here, Malik had discovered that his instincts for helping Zuri could extend to other children facing similar challenges. Volunteering gave him purpose during unemployment, but more importantly, it reminded him that struggle could become strength when shared with others who understood. As he watched Zuri navigate their small kitchen with confident movements, adapting naturally to her new reality, Malik felt a familiar mixture of heartbreak and hope. The accident had stolen her leg, but revealed her resilience. His job loss threatened their stability, but opened unexpected opportunities for service. Neither parent knew that their paths would cross that afternoon at the community center, where desperation meets compassion, where wealth confronts wisdom, and where two children's journeys toward mobility would become the foundation for something neither family could have anticipated. But what happened next challenged everything she thought she knew about success, strength, and the true meaning of wealth. 3 weeks later, Malik Reyes stood at his kitchen sink, washing dishes that had accumulated while he spent hours researching job prospects online. The rejection emails were becoming routine, polite variations of, "We've decided to move forward with other candidates." At 34, with a high school diploma and 15 years of construction experience, he was competing against younger workers willing to accept lower wages. His calloused hands that had learned to be gentle through necessity, moved methodically across each plate. These same hands had rebuilt Zuri's confidence, one careful movement at a time, teaching her that adaptation wasn't defeat, but evolution. When the accident happened 8 months ago, doctors had focused on what she'd lost. Malik chose to concentrate on what remained, her spirit, her intelligence, her unstoppable determination to prove that one missing leg couldn't define her future. "Dad," Mrs. Chen called, Zuri announced from the living room, where she was arranging her school books with characteristic precision. "She needs help setting up for the adaptive sports program this afternoon." Mrs. Chen ran the Community Disability Center with the efficiency of a general and the heart of a grandmother. When Malik first brought Zuri there, uncertain and overwhelmed, she'd taken one look at his lost expression and handed him a volunteer application. "People who've walked this path make the best guides," she'd said simply. Now, twice a week, Malik donated his time helping other families navigate challenges he understood intimately. The work paid nothing, but it filled something in him that paychecks never had. Watching a child take their first steps with a new prosthetic, seeing parents discover they weren't alone in their struggles. These moments reminded him that purpose didn't always come with a salary. "Tell her we'll be there by 2, he replied, drying his hands on a towel that had seen better days. The center couldn't afford to pay him, and he couldn't afford to work for free much longer. But until he found steady employment, he'd continue showing up for families who needed someone who genuinely understood. The Riverside Community Center occupied a converted warehouse in a neighborhood where property values made space affordable for nonprofit organizations. The building's industrial bones had been softened with bright paint, adaptive equipment, and the kind of worn furniture that spoke of heavy use and careful maintenance. Malik arrived to find controlled chaos. Children with various mobility challenges were participating in modified relay races, while parents clustered in conversation groups, sharing the kind of practical advice that medical professionals rarely provided. The atmosphere buzzed with laughter, occasional frustration, and the underlying current of families supporting each other through shared understanding. He moved naturally through the space, adjusting equipment height for smaller children, offering quiet encouragement to a boy struggling with new forearm crutches, helping a mother understand her daughter's wheelchair positioning. His movements held the confidence of someone who'd learned through experience rather than instruction. Knowledge earned through sleepless nights, countless therapy sessions, and the gradual realization that loving someone with disabilities meant becoming an expert in possibilities. Mr. Malik, a 6-year-old girl with spina bifida, wheeled herself toward him with determined enthusiasm. "Watch me go fast." She demonstrated her latest skill, propelling her wheelchair in tight circles with impressive speed, while Malik cheered her progress. These children didn't see his unemployment or worry about next month's rent. They saw someone who celebrated their victories and understood their frustrations without requiring explanations. At 2:30, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot, its pristine exterior contrasting sharply with the utilitarian vehicles typically found there. Aurelia Voss emerged, carrying Theo and wearing the kind of understated luxury that marked serious wealth. Designer jeans that cost more than most families' monthly grocery budget, a cashmere sweater in subtle gray, shoes that whispered rather than announced their expensive origins. She paused at the entrance, clearly uncertain. This wasn't the sterile, appointments-only environment of private medical facilities. Children moved freely through space designed for accessibility rather than aesthetics. Parents wore comfortable clothes instead of business attire. The sounds were organic, real laughter, genuine conversation, the occasional tears that came with difficult breakthroughs. Mrs. Chen approached with welcoming efficiency. "Mrs. Voss, I'm so glad you decided to visit. Let me show you around." As they toured the facility, Aurelia found herself studying the other families. A mother was patiently working with her son on transferring from wheelchair to floor mat. Two fathers discussed the merits of different ankle-foot orthoses while their children played nearby. The conversations were technical but warm, filled with the kind of detailed knowledge that came from daily necessity rather than professional training. Her attention was drawn to a man kneeling beside a young girl who was crying softly. The child's prosthetic leg had apparently caused discomfort, and she was frustrated by her inability to participate in a game the other children were playing. Malik's voice carried clearly across the space as he spoke to the upset child. "I know it hurts, Sophia. Zuri felt the same way when she first got her leg. Want to know her secret?" He gestured toward his own daughter, who immediately wheeled over to join the conversation. "The leg isn't the boss of you," Zuri announced with 8-year-old authority. "You're the boss of it, but sometimes bosses need to take breaks." The simple reframing shifted Sophia's perspective immediately. Instead of being defeated by discomfort, she became empowered to make choices about her own body. Within minutes, she was back in the game, playing at her own pace with renewed confidence. Aurelia watched this interaction with growing fascination. She'd witnessed dozens of medical professionals work with Theo, but none had demonstrated this intuitive understanding of the emotional landscape that accompanied physical challenges. Something in Malik's movements spoke of hard-won wisdom, not textbook training. His responses came from a place of genuine empathy rather than clinical knowledge. When Theo began fussing in her arms, reaching toward the other children with obvious interest, Malik glanced over with a smile that felt both professional and personal. "First time here?" he asked, approaching with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his environment. "Yes," Aurelia replied, suddenly aware that her usual commanding presence felt out of place. "I'm exploring different approaches to therapy." Malik nodded, understanding. "Sometimes the best therapy doesn't feel like therapy at all. Mind if I say hello to this little guy?" If you've ever met someone who just got it in a way professionals couldn't, share your experience below. 2 days after their first meeting at the community center, Aurelia found herself questioning every decision she'd made regarding Theo's treatment. The latest session with Dr. Morrison's team had been a disaster that left both mother and child emotionally drained. The $15,000 robotic gait trainer had malfunctioned halfway through the session, its computerized system freezing while Theo was suspended in the harness. What should have been a supportive exercise became a frightening experience as the machine locked him in an awkward position, his small legs dangling helplessly while technicians scrambled to reset the system. Equipment failure happens, Dr. Morrison had said with clinical detachment, as if Theo's terrified crying was merely an inconvenience. We can reschedule for next week once the calibration issues are resolved. But Aurelia had seen something in her son's eyes that no rescheduled appointment could address, a loss of trust that went beyond mechanical malfunction. Theo had been willing to try, had shown genuine effort, and the sophisticated technology had failed him at a crucial moment. Standing in her penthouse nursery that evening, watching Theo sleep fitfully after the traumatic session, Aurelia made an impulsive decision. She pulled out the business card Mrs. Chen had given her, the one with Malik's contact information for families seeking additional support. Her fingers hesitated over her phone. Calling a stranger felt like admitting defeat, acknowledging that her carefully researched, expensively assembled team of experts couldn't help her own child. But desperation has a way of dissolving pride, and watching Theo struggle had pushed her past the point of caring about appearances. Mr. Reyes? This is Aurelia Voss. We met at the community center yesterday. I was wondering, would you be willing to work with my son? Privately, I mean. I can compensate you for your time. Malik's pause was brief but noticeable. Mrs. Voss, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm just a dad who's learned some things along the way. That's exactly what I need, Aurelia replied, surprising herself with the honesty. Someone who understands this from the inside, not from a textbook. They arranged to meet the following afternoon. Malik arrived carrying a canvas bag that looked worn from frequent use, his appearance neat but clearly borrowed from a limited wardrobe. The contrast between his second-hand jeans and Aurelia's marble-floored, art-filled penthouse was immediately apparent. This is quite a place, he said, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows and designer furniture with obvious discomfort. Everything in the space spoke of money, from the custom lighting to the handcrafted Italian furniture that cost more than most people's annual salaries. It's just a home, Aurelia replied, though she heard how hollow that sounded. The truth was, she'd worked so hard to build this symbol of success that she'd forgotten how intimidating it might appear to others. Malik's attention quickly shifted to Theo, who was sitting on a soft playmat surrounded by adaptive toys that bore the logos of expensive medical supply companies. Hey there, buddy. Ready to have some fun? He knelt beside Theo with easy familiarity, immediately beginning an assessment that felt different from the clinical evaluations Aurelia was accustomed to. Instead of measuring ranges of motion or testing reflexes, Malik simply observed, watching how Theo moved naturally, what captured his attention, where his instincts led him when left to explore freely. He wants to move, Malik observed after several minutes. Look how he leans forward, how his eyes track movement across the room. His brain is sending all the right signals. We just need to help his body receive them more clearly. From his canvas bag, Malik produced items that seemed almost embarrassingly simple compared to the high-tech equipment filling the nursery. A resistance band that had clearly seen extensive use. Several tennis balls wrapped in different textures. A homemade balance board constructed from plywood and a foam roller. I made most of these for Zuri, he explained, noting Aurelia's questioning expression. Sometimes the best tools are the ones you can customize for exactly what your child needs. What followed challenged everything Aurelia thought she understood about effective therapy. Instead of rigid exercise protocols, Malik turned movement into play. He used the textured tennis balls to stimulate Theo's feet while encouraging reaching movements that naturally engaged his core muscles. The resistance band became a game where Theo could explore pushing and pulling motions that built strength without feeling like work. Most remarkably, Theo responded with enthusiasm instead of the resigned tolerance he'd shown during professional sessions. His laughter filled the space as Malik transformed necessary exercises into enjoyable activities. The key, Malik explained while helping Theo maintain sitting balance on the homemade board, is making his brain want to figure out the movement. When we force positions, we're working against his instincts. When we create situations where movement is the natural solution to an interesting problem, his nervous system starts building new pathways. Aurelia found herself taking notes, not because she planned to replicate the techniques, But because she was witnessing something she'd never seen before, Theo actively participating in his own therapy rather than enduring it. After 40 minutes of engaged play, Malik helped Theo into a standing position using a technique that seemed impossibly simple. Instead of expensive parallel bars or complex harness systems, he used his own body as a support structure, allowing Theo to bear weight gradually while maintaining the security of human contact. "Feel how he's gripping my hands?" Malik asked quietly. He's learning to trust that someone will be there when he needs support. That confidence is what makes independent steps possible. With careful encouragement and patient support, Malik guided Theo through 3 assisted steps across the living room. They were small, unsteady movements that required significant help, but they represented more progress than months of expensive therapy had achieved. When Theo took those 3 wobbly steps, both parents cried, for entirely different reasons. Aurelia wept from relief and gratitude, finally seeing tangible hope after so many disappointing sessions. Malik's tears came from recognition, remembering his own overwhelming emotions when Zuri had achieved similar milestones. "How?" Aurelia asked when she could trust her voice. "6 specialists, $500,000 in equipment, and you accomplished more in one afternoon than we've managed in months." Malik's response was characteristically modest. "I didn't accomplish anything. Theo did the work. I just created conditions where his natural abilities could emerge. Sometimes expensive doesn't mean better. It just means more complicated." The truth settled over Aurelia with uncomfortable clarity. This single dad with no formal training was doing what 6 specialists couldn't, connecting with her son as a whole person rather than a collection of symptoms to be managed. Could we make this arrangement regular?" she asked, already anticipating his potential objections. "I know you're looking for full-time work, but until you find something permanent, I could provide compensation that." "Mrs. Voss," Malik interrupted gently, "this isn't about money. If I can help Theo, I'm willing to try. But I think both our kids might benefit from being part of something bigger than individual therapy sessions." He told her about the weekly support group meetings at the community center, where parents shared strategies and children played together while working on their individual challenges. The idea of joining a group, of potentially exposing her private struggles to strangers, made Aurelia uncomfortable. But watching Theo's transformation during this single session had shaken her assumptions about many things. Like if you believe that sometimes the best help comes from unexpected places. For 6 weeks, Malik and Aurelia had established a routine that seemed to benefit both families. 3 afternoons each week, Malik would arrive at the penthouse with his canvas bag of homemade therapy tools, transforming Aurelia's pristine living room into a space where Theo could explore movement without fear. The progress was undeniable. Theo had gone from 3 assisted steps to nearly a dozen, his confidence growing with each session. Zuri often accompanied her father, and the 2 children had formed an unlikely friendship. Shun would demonstrate walking techniques with her prosthetic, showing Theo that mobility challenges didn't prevent adventure. Their play sessions became informal peer therapy, with Zuri's matter-of-fact attitude about adaptive equipment helping Theo approach his own challenges with less anxiety. But on a gray Tuesday morning in November, Malik received a phone call that shattered their carefully constructed stability. "I'm sorry, Malik." His former supervisor's voice carried regret and frustration. "The Henderson project got canceled. The developer pulled funding last week. I know I said we'd have work for you by December, but with 3 major contracts falling through." The construction industry's downturn had been building for months, but Malik had remained optimistic that his 15 years of experience would eventually secure steady employment. Now, staring at his rapidly shrinking bank account and the stack of unpaid bills accumulating on his kitchen table, optimism felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. His unemployment benefits covered basic necessities, but left no room for emergencies. The community center work, while meaningful, provided no income. The informal arrangement with Aurelia helped, but he'd insisted on keeping their financial arrangement minimal, accepting only enough to cover gas and lost time rather than treating it as employment. "Dad?" Zuri's voice carried concern beyond her 8 years. Is everything okay? Malik realized he'd been staring at the phone for several minutes, processing the implications of another closed door. Just work stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about. But children who've experienced instability develop sensitive antennae for adult stress. Zuri had learned to read subtle signs during the difficult months after her accident, when medical bills and reduced work hours had strained their finances to the breaking point. The impact on Theo's sessions became apparent within days. Malik's usual patient enthusiasm was clouded by distraction. Phone calls about job prospects interrupted their afternoon routines. Twice, he had to cancel sessions entirely to attend interviews that ultimately led nowhere. Theo, sensitive to emotional atmospheres in the way that many children with developmental challenges are, responded to the disruption with regression. The confident steps he'd been taking became tentative again. His willingness to try new exercises diminished. The progress they'd celebrated began to stall. Aurelia noticed the changes immediately, but initially attributed them to natural plateaus in development. Only when Malik arrived 20 minutes late to a session, obviously flustered and apologetic, did she begin to understand the broader situation. I'm sorry, Mrs. Voss. I had a phone interview that ran longer than expected, and is everything all right? She asked, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way his usual easy confidence had been replaced by anxious energy. Malik hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of discussing personal problems with someone who lived in such different circumstances. Just some employment challenges. Nothing that affects my commitment to helping Theo. But it did affect his ability to help. Over the following weeks, as Malik's job search grew increasingly desperate and his financial situation more precarious, their sessions became inconsistent. His focus wavered. The creative energy that had made therapy feel like play was replaced by the kind of distracted attention that comes when someone's mind is occupied with survival concerns. Aurelia found herself facing an uncomfortable dilemma. She could return to the expensive specialists and structured programs that had failed before, accepting that Theo's remarkable progress might be temporary. Or she could find ways to support Malik through his crisis, recognizing that her son's development had become intertwined with another family's stability. The revelation came during a particularly difficult session on a rain-soaked afternoon in December. Gray clouds pressed against the penthouse windows, while Theo struggled through exercises that had been easy just weeks before. Malik's patience remained intact, but his usual innovative adaptations were replaced by mechanical repetition of familiar techniques. When the session ended with minimal progress and Theo's frustration evident, Malik sat heavily in one of Aurelia's designer chairs, his composure finally cracking. I'm failing him, he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated disappointments. Theo was making such good progress, and now? You're not failing anyone, Aurelia replied, though she could see the truth in his assessment. What's really going on? The story emerged slowly. Months of unemployment, savings depleted, interviews that led nowhere. The growing possibility that he might have to accept work in another city, even another state, if he wanted to provide stability for Zuri. I might have to leave, he admitted, the words clearly painful. I can't keep working with Theo if I can't even keep a roof over my daughter's head. There's a construction job in Portland that would cover our basic needs, but it would mean starting over completely. The prospect of losing Malik's guidance felt catastrophic to Aurelia, not just for Theo's development, but for her own growth as a parent. Through their partnership, she'd learned that effective support came from understanding rather than resources, from patience rather than technology. Money can't replace human connection, she realized aloud, the words surprising her with their clarity. All my expensive equipment and specialist appointments never accomplished what you did in that first session. Malik looked up, confused by her tone. Mrs. Voss, I appreciate that, but appreciation doesn't pay rent. No, but community can help with both, Aurelia replied, her mind already working through possibilities that extended far beyond their personal arrangement. That evening, after Malik had left with promises to call about his Portland decision, Aurelia sat in her study contemplating options. She could simply offer financial support, enough to cover Malik's expenses until he found stable work. The amount would be insignificant to her budget, but life-changing for his family. But as she thought about their journey together, about the other families at the community center who faced similar struggles, a larger vision began to emerge. Individual charity might solve Malik's immediate crisis, but it wouldn't address the systemic issues that left caring, skilled people like him vulnerable to economic instability. The next morning, Aurelia made a series of phone calls that surprised even her closest associates. Instead of reaching out to her usual network of wealthy philanthropists and corporate contacts, she called Mrs. Chen at the community center. "I want to organize a fundraiser," she announced. "Not just for Malik's family, but for the support programs that make such a difference for families like ours." "Mrs. Voss, that's very generous, but our families don't typically—" "I don't want to fund it," Aurelia interrupted. "I want to help organize it so the community can support itself. There's a difference." What followed exceeded everyone's expectations. The fundraiser, held at the community center on a cold Saturday in January, drew an enormous crowd. Families who had benefited from the support programs contributed what they could. Local businesses donated services and products. Neighbors who had no direct connection to disability issues came because they recognized the value of community programs that supported vulnerable families. The financial goal was modest, enough to create a small emergency fund for families facing temporary crises. But the emotional impact was transformative. Person after person stood up to share stories about how peer support had made the difference during their darkest moments. A mother described how Malik had spent hours teaching her son to navigate stairs with his walker. A father talked about the confidence his daughter had gained from watching Zuri's fearless approach to adaptive sports. Elderly neighbors spoke about the joy they felt watching children in the community code playground that had been modified for accessibility. By evening's end, the fundraiser had raised enough money not just to cover Malik's immediate needs, but to establish ongoing support systems for other families facing similar challenges. More importantly, it had created a network of people committed to ensuring that caring individuals like Malik could continue their informal mentoring work without risking their own stability. Malik stood before the crowd that evening, holding Zuri's hand and struggling to find words adequate for his gratitude. "6 months ago, I thought asking for help meant admitting failure," he said finally. "Tonight I learned that accepting support means joining something bigger than any one family's struggles." The community had saved him, not through charity, but through recognition of mutual investment in each other's success. Comment community if you believe ordinary people can create extraordinary change. Spring brought transformations that extended far beyond seasonal changes. 3 months after the community fundraiser, Theo was walking independently across his nursery, tentative steps that gained confidence with each passing day. The milestone markers Aurelia had once tracked obsessively through expensive assessments now emerged naturally through play and daily life. "Mama, watch," became Theo's favorite phrase as he demonstrated new abilities. Walking from the kitchen to the living room without holding furniture, climbing onto his child-sized chair unassisted, standing up from sitting position without using his hands for support. Each achievement was modest by typical developmental standards, but represented victories that the entire community celebrated. Malik's documentation of these milestones reflected his construction background, precise measurements transformed into progress tracking. Week 12, independent standing for 47 seconds. Week 14, walking 15 feet without assistance. Week 16, climbing 3 stairs with rail support. The numbers told a story of steady advancement that professional therapy reports had never captured. But Theo's physical progress was only part of a larger transformation. Aurelia found herself changing in ways she hadn't anticipated when this partnership began. The commanding executive who had once controlled every variable in her professional life was learning to embrace the unpredictability that came with collaborative parenting. "I used to think good mothers had all the answers," she confided to Malik during one of their evening conversations after Theo had gone to sleep. "Now I realize that good mothers know when to ask for help." Their arrangement had evolved into something resembling extended family. Malik arrived each morning at 7:30, sharing breakfast preparation and morning routines with the ease of someone who belonged in the space. Zuri had claimed a corner of Theo's playroom for homework, treating the penthouse as a second home, where academic struggles received patient attention from adults who understood that learning differences required creative approaches. The community center meetings had become weekly gatherings for an expanding network of families. What began as informal support sessions evolved into structured programs where parents shared practical strategies while children participated in adaptive activities. Aurelia's business skills proved valuable for organizing resources and coordinating schedules, while Malik's instinctive understanding of individual needs shaped the programming content. Other families began requesting private consultations, recognizing the effectiveness of their collaborative approach. A mother whose daughter had spina bifida asked for guidance with wheelchair navigation techniques. Parents of a child with muscular dystrophy sought advice about maintaining independence as mobility decreased. Each family brought unique challenges that expanded everyone's knowledge base. "We're creating something that didn't exist before," Mrs. Chen observed during a planning meeting for their first major community event. "Professional therapy addresses medical needs, but you're addressing the whole family's emotional and social development." The adaptive sports event in May represented the culmination of months of preparation and anticipation. Riverside Park had been selected for its natural accessibility features, but the community had contributed additional modifications. Volunteer engineers from Aurelia's professional network collaborated with local contractors to install temporary ramps, adaptive code playground equipment, and shaded rest areas. The morning of the event dawned clear and warm, with families arriving early to claim picnic spots and register for various activities. Children who used wheelchairs, walkers, prosthetics, and braces mingled freely with their able-bodied siblings and friends. Parents who had once felt isolated by their children's challenges found themselves part of a larger community where adaptive equipment was unremarkable and assistance was offered naturally. Malik served as event coordinator, his construction experience proving invaluable for logistics, while his parenting experience guided activity planning. Aurelia managed registration and volunteer coordination, discovering that her executive skills translated effectively to community organizing when applied with genuine investment rather than professional obligation. The morning activities included modified relay races, adaptive basketball, and mobility skill demonstrations. Children taught each other techniques they'd mastered: how to navigate curbs in a wheelchair, how to adjust prosthetic equipment for different activities, how to use visual cues when balance was unreliable. But the moment that crystallized everything occurred during the afternoon walking demonstration. Theo, wearing a bright red t-shirt that made him easily visible in the crowd, participated in a group activity where children walked a marked path while family members cheered encouragement. When his turn came, Theo approached the starting line with the serious concentration he brought to challenging tasks. The path was 50 feet long, a distance that had once seemed impossible, but now represented achievable goals. Malik walked beside him for support, ready to assist if needed, but allowing Theo to demonstrate his independence. Step by step, Theo made his way along the path. His gait was still uneven, his balance occasionally uncertain, but his determination was absolute. The crowd's cheers grew louder as he progressed, not because the task was extraordinary, but because everyone present understood the significance of those confident movements. When Theo reached the finish line and raised his arms in triumph, the applause wasn't just celebration of one child's achievement. It was recognition that this moment represented something larger. Proof that community support could transform individual struggles into collective victories. Aurelia watched from the sidelines, tears streaming down her face as she realized this wasn't just about her son anymore. Every family present had contributed to Theo's success through shared knowledge, encouragement, and the kind of peer support that no amount of money could purchase. His walking represented the effectiveness of their entire approach to collaborative care. The foundation announcement came that evening during the closing ceremony. Aurelia had been planning the formal launch for weeks, but the day's events provided perfect context for introducing Steps of Hope as an official organization. 6 months ago, I thought I could solve my son's challenges by hiring the best specialists and buying the most advanced equipment, she told the gathered crowd. I was wrong about almost everything except one thing. Theo needed help to walk. What I didn't understand was that the help we needed couldn't be purchased. It had to be built through relationships, trust, and community commitment. She gestured toward Malik, who stood nearby with Zuri beside him. This man taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in human connection. He showed me that expertise comes from experience, not just education, and that the most effective therapy happens when children feel supported by people who genuinely understand their journey. Malik stepped forward, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came from personal experience with adversity and recovery. Every small step builds bridges to bigger dreams, he said, looking around at the faces of families who had become part of their extended community. Steps of Hope will ensure that no family faces these challenges alone, that practical wisdom gets shared, and that children like Theo and Zuri grow up knowing their community believes in their potential. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. Parents stood and applauded, children cheered, and volunteers who had given their time to make the day successful nodded approval for the formalization of work they'd already been doing informally. As the evening wound down and families began gathering their belongings, Aurelia and Malik found themselves working side by side to dismantle equipment and coordinate cleanup efforts. The easy partnership they developed over months of collaboration had created a foundation for something neither had anticipated when this journey began. "Can I tell you something?" Aurelia asked as they folded the last of the registration tables. "When I first called you, I was looking for someone to fix my son. I didn't expect to find someone who would help me become a better parent." Malik's smile carried warmth that had become familiar over their months of partnership. "When I first started volunteering at the community center, I thought I was giving other families the benefit of my experience with Zuri. I didn't expect to discover that helping others would teach me so much about being a better father myself." The conversation that followed touched on subjects they'd been circling around for weeks. The way their partnership had evolved beyond professional collaboration into genuine friendship. The comfort they'd found in sharing parenting responsibilities. The recognition that both their children thrived in an environment where two adults worked together with mutual respect and shared commitment. "This feels like more than co-parenting," Aurelia said carefully, testing words that felt both obvious and risky. "It feels like family," Malik replied, his honesty matching hers. "Not the kind that's defined by blood or legal documents, but the kind that's built through choosing to show up for each other every day." The foundation launch had been successful beyond their projections, but the personal revelations of that evening marked the beginning of something equally transformative. Two adults who had entered this partnership focused entirely on their children's needs were discovering that their own happiness mattered too, and that sometimes the most unexpected relationships became the strongest foundations for the future. Subscribe if you want to see more stories of people building bridges across divides. 15 years later, on a crisp October morning that mirrored the day Aurelia and Malik first met, the Riverside Community Center buzzed with familiar energy. The building had expanded twice since those early meetings, now occupying an entire block with dedicated spaces for adaptive sports, family counseling, and peer mentoring programs. Theo Voss, now 17 and towering over his mother at 6 feet tall, moved through the space with the confident gait of someone who had never doubted his ability to walk. His easy laugh echoed across the main activity room as he demonstrated balance exercises to a group of younger children, his patient teaching style clearly inherited from the man who had become his stepfather 8 years earlier. "Remember, the goal isn't perfect steps," Theo told a 6-year-old girl who was struggling with her new leg braces. "The goal is your own best steps. Every person's walk looks different, and that's exactly how it should be." His words carried the authority of lived experience. Theo's journey from those tentative first steps had led him through high school track participation, peer counseling certification, and acceptance to Stanford University's bioengineering program. His senior year project involved designing adaptive code playground equipment based on insights gathered from years of community center involvement. Across the room, Zuri Reyes-Vos coached a wheelchair basketball team with the intensity of someone who understood that competitive sports could transform self-perception. At 23, she had claimed 3 Paralympic medals in adaptive track events while completing her master's degree in physical therapy. Her approach combined technical expertise with the kind of personal understanding that only came from navigating similar challenges. Defense isn't about blocking every move, she called to her players during a practice drill. It's about anticipating possibilities and positioning yourself for success. Same principle applies to everything else in life. The marriage of their parents 5 years earlier had formalized relationships that had been functioning as family long before legal documents made it official. Malik and Aurelia's wedding had been held at the community center, surrounded by the network of families who had supported their individual journeys and celebrated their partnership. Steps of Hope had grown from a modest local initiative into a nationally recognized organization. The Foundation's annual report showed impressive numbers: 2,847 families served directly, 15 community centers established across 3 states, $1.8 million in emergency assistance provided, and 342 volunteer mentors trained in peer support techniques. But statistics couldn't capture the Foundation's true impact: the confidence that came when children saw adults who looked like them succeeding, the relief parents felt when they had discovered they weren't alone in their struggles, the systemic changes that emerged when communities recognized the value of inclusive programming. The ripple effects extended far beyond individual families. Local school districts had integrated adaptive physical therapy into standard programming, ensuring that children with mobility challenges received appropriate support without requiring expensive private interventions. City planning departments now consulted with disability advocates before approving new construction projects, resulting in public spaces designed for universal accessibility from the beginning rather than retrofitted later. The cultural shift was perhaps most visible in casual community interactions. Adaptive equipment had become unremarkable in local parks and code playgrounds. Children who used mobility devices participated in neighborhood activities without special arrangements or awkward accommodations. Parents of children with disabilities found acceptance rather than isolation when they moved to the area. "We changed the conversation," Aurelia reflected during a recent board meeting. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with this child?" the community learned to ask, "What support does this family need to thrive?" This particular morning held special significance because it marked the 15th anniversary of that first encounter between a desperate mother and a patient father. The community center was hosting a celebration that would honor founding families while launching an expanded mentorship program designed to replicate their model in other cities. As guests arrived for the anniversary celebration, a scene unfolded that felt both familiar and poignant. Dr. Patricia Williams, a prominent surgeon whose 3-year-old daughter had recently been diagnosed with spina bifida, stood near the registration table, looking overwhelmed and uncertain. Her designer clothes and expensive accessories marked her as someone accustomed to solving problems through financial resources. But her expression carried the helpless confusion that came when money couldn't purchase the solutions she needed. Nearby, Marcus Johnson waited with his 5-year-old son, David, who had been born with cerebral palsy. Marcus's work clothes and worn sneakers told a story of economic struggle, but his patient interaction with his son demonstrated the kind of practical wisdom that came from daily experience with adaptive parenting techniques. Both families had been referred to Steps of Hope by medical professionals who recognized that successful disability adaptation required community support beyond clinical interventions. Both parents carried the mixture of hope and anxiety that marked families beginning this journey. Aurelia and Malik approached the newcomers with the practiced ease of people who had welcomed hundreds of families through similar transitions. Their partnership in these introductory conversations had become seamless over the years. Aurelia's business background helping with practical resource navigation, while Malik's intuitive understanding of parenting challenges provided emotional support. Dr. Williams, I'm Aurelia, and this is Malik. We're so glad you decided to visit today. Aurelia began, her tone carrying warmth that invited trust rather than commanding it. We know how overwhelming this can feel, Malik added, addressing both parents with equal attention. The good news is that you're not figuring this out alone. As they talked, Theo appeared beside them with David perched confidently on his shoulders, a casual gesture that demonstrated how naturally inclusion had become embedded in the community center's culture. The sight of a successful teenager who clearly understood David's challenges without making them the focus of attention brought visible relief to Marcus's worried expression. Want to see something cool? Theo asked David, who nodded eagerly. There's a track outside where kids practice racing with all different kinds of equipment. Wheelchairs, walkers, crutches, prosthetics. Everyone has their own style. Dr. Williams watched this interaction with the fascination of someone witnessing possibilities she hadn't known existed. How do you make it look so easy? She asked Aurelia quietly. Time and community, Aurelia replied honestly. 15 years ago, I stood exactly where you're standing now. I thought success meant hiring the best specialists and buying the most advanced equipment. I was wrong about almost everything except the most important thing. Our children needed support to reach their potential. We just had to learn that the most effective support came from people who understood the journey personally. The anniversary celebration that afternoon brought together over 300 families whose lives had been touched by Steps of Hope programming. Success stories filled the room. Children who had grown into confident adults, parents who had transformed their advocacy experience into professional careers, community leaders who had emerged from this network to influence policy and programming throughout the region. During the program, as speakers shared memories of early challenges and subsequent victories, the founding principle that had guided their work from the beginning remained clear. Extraordinary change happened when ordinary people chose to support each other across traditional divides. Sometimes the most life-changing help comes from the most unexpected places, Malik told the gathered crowd during his closing remarks. Not because of money or status, but because of shared humanity and the courage to reach across divides. Every family here represents proof that individual struggles can become collective strength when we choose connection over isolation. The evening concluded with families mingling in the renovated spaces that had witnessed countless breakthroughs over the years. New parents received practical advice from experienced families. Children who had benefited from earlier programming now served as mentors for younger participants. The cycle of support that had begun with two desperate parents had become a sustainable model for community-based family assistance. As Aurelia and Malik walked through the center that night, turning off lights and securing doors, they paused in the main activity room where Theo had first demonstrated confident walking 15 years earlier. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that day? Aurelia asked, her voice carrying gratitude for paths taken and opportunities embraced. I think we would have found each other eventually, Malik replied, his arm around her waist as they surveyed the space that had become the heart of their life's work. People who are determined to help their children succeed tend to discover other people with the same commitment. Their legacy lived not in the building around them or even in the foundation that bore their efforts forward, but in the countless families who had learned that strength was multiplied when shared. That expertise came from experience as much as education, and that the most transformative victories emerged when communities chose to support each other through their greatest challenges. Share the story with someone who needs hope today. What unexpected help changed your life? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe to Untold Triumphs for more stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change.